Good morning and welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. This morning, progressive prosecutors are reopening investigations of deadly police shootings that resulted in no charges under their predecessors, spurring pushback from police unions. The prosecutors' actions has led unions in Austin, Texas, San Francisco, and Philadelphia to back campaigns to boot the prosecutors from office. We discussed this morning on the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. First, though, the headlines. In an announcement that has provided a jolt to the 2022 midterm elections, Stacey Abrams says she's running for governor of the Peach State. The race, which could mean a second duel between Abrams and Republican Governor Brian Kemp, promises to catapult Democrats into the position of favorites. A Democrat and noted voting rights advocate, Stacey Abrams lost to Kemp by just over 1 percentage point in their controversial 2018 battle. Her activism helped Democrats claim the majority in the U.S. Senate when Georgia Democrats Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff defeated Republicans Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue in the January 2021 runoff election. Stacey Abrams says, "I'm running because opportunity in our state shouldn't be determined by zip code, background, or access to power. That's the job of the governor, to fight for one Georgia, our Georgia. And now it is time to get the job done." So Stacey Abrams formally announcing that she is running for governor of Georgia. Renowned civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump and St. Thomas University College of Law announced on Thursday an initiative to prepare new and diverse lawyers to lead the fight against injustice. The Benjamin L. Crump Center for Social Justice at the St. Thomas University College of Law will provide innovative programming, symposiums, and training to catalyze the next generation of social justice engineers. The center is initially funded by a $1 million leadership grant from Truist Financial Corporation through its Truist Charitable Fund, a donor-advised fund at the Winston-Salem Foundation. Thursday also marked the opening of a $35 million campaign by the College of Law to support ongoing transformative efforts to champion students from traditionally marginalized communities and diversify the legal profession. Attorney Crump has been a leader in civil rights litigation this century, representing the families of Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, among others. He testified in the U.S. Congress and at the United Nations and was recognized with accolades on the global scale by Time magazine. Throughout his career, Attorney Crump has vigorously defended the rights of marginalized peoples and has led the call for criminal justice reform. So that's one to look for. The Ben Crump Center for Justice in Florida. We will be reporting more on this as it progresses. Now, let's bring on the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis, Jr. Good morning, Dr. Chavis. You're on mute, Dr. Chavis. Dr. Chavis, you're muted.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm still in Atlanta, Georgia this morning, but I'm glad to greet you and all of the brothers and sisters on behalf of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Karen Carter Richards, our distinguished chair, and all our 230 African-American owned publishers, where you and I headed to Nashville to salute Rosetta Perry, the distinguished publisher of the Tennessee Tribune this weekend. But this is Friday, and certainly we salute Ben Crump for starting that important center that's going to give more justice, more equality, more fairness for African Americans and other people of color across the country. So that's a great milestone. We salute him for creating this much needed legal center.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Chavis, also in the news this morning, the Ohio sheriff's deputy who fatally shot Casey Goodson Jr. in the back 5 times was charged yesterday with murder in an encounter that led to protests and about which many questions remain, in part because it was not recorded on body or dash cam footage. An attorney for the family of Goodson, who was Black, also announced a federal civil rights lawsuit against the now retired white deputy who shot him, Jason Meade, and the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, alleging wrongful death and excessive use of force. The fatal shooting of Goodson took place in Columbus on December 4th, 2020, while Meade, a 17-year member of the Sheriff's Office, was finishing an unsuccessful search for a fugitive as part of his work for a U.S. Marshals Service task force. Goodson was not the subject of the fugitive search, and the Marshals have said Meade wasn't performing a mission for them at the time of the shooting. So lots and lots of questions there. The only thing missing, Dr. Chavis, from this is the video.
Yes. Well, again, there's so much police misconduct, and it crosses racial lines. And I think that I'm looking forward to our special guest this morning, our brother Neil Franklin, because he's our resident expert on all these police matters. In fact, I'm here with NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, here in Atlanta with the National Association of Black Elected State Officials. We've been warmly received here. The Black press is on the case. And I think that this is another example of the injustice in our society, STACY.
Yeah, and speaking of Major Neil Franklin, we have as our special guest this morning, Major Neil Franklin, and also from the Dallas Weekly, our distinguished publisher, Patrick Washington. Let's say good morning to both of them right now.
Good morning, Neil. Good morning, Patrick.
Good morning, Dr. Chavis.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get right into the discussion. The Attorney General of Maine has declined 14 years ago to prosecute the police officer who had killed Gregory Jackson, an 18-year-old passenger who fled on foot from a routine traffic stop in the town of Waldoboro. They called it legally justified. The Attorney General at the time ruled, it was nearly 11 years ago, that the district attorney in Westchester County, New York, found no crime when an officer claiming he was about to be run over had fired at Danroy Henry, who was 20. He had bumped his Nissan Altima into the officer outside a bar while police responded to an unrelated scuffle inside. They found no reasonable cause to indict. And then it was 2 years ago that the Los Angeles County prosecutor cleared the officers who had shot Christopher DeAndre Mitchell, who was 23. He had been in the driver's seat of a stolen vehicle with an air rifle between his knees. They said that the officers acted lawfully and in self-defense. Now, in the aftermath of protests over racial justice and police abuse, new prosecutors are taking a previously rare step. Major Neil, they are reopening investigations into all 3 deadly car stops, asking whether the use of force was justified or if the officers should face criminal charges. Your thoughts, Major Neil, your initial thoughts when you hear that they are reopening these cases? Major Neil, can you hear us?
You're on mute, Neil.
You're on mute.
But it's me every time. Just like
We got you now, man. Welcome. Good to see you, bro.
Again, thanks for having me on board. I really appreciate it. So my initial thoughts here is that this is very much needed, and this is why. With the many videos that we currently see of police misconduct, especially in the area of excessive force, through body cams, through citizens pulling out their cell phones and recording police-citizen encounters, we're starting to see what Black folks have been saying for a very long time, that the police are abusive, that excessive force is rampant, but no one was believing what these folks were saying. So now these prosecutors are going back and reopening these cases and taking a critical look at these cases to reevaluate whether or not justice was done. This is the importance for universal body cam. Every police officer in this country should be wearing body cam. Every citizen who has a cell phone that witnesses a police encounter should videotape that encounter in a reasonable way. and mainly the feds, who currently do not wear body cams, need to be equipped with body cams. And so that's one thing. These prosecutors are very courageous and very brave in doing this because it's just beginning. It's unpopular in many parts of this country. They probably will have a difficult time getting elected, but it is a trend that we are seeing, and it is a necessary trend. And I'll comment in a couple of seconds on the use of force standard that we currently use to evaluate the use of force by police officers, which I think is very important, which needs to change. And that is relative to the case law of Connor versus Graham.
Yeah, and Patrick Washington, Dallas Weekly. I know your paper, like most newspapers in the Black press, have covered too many of these cases where an unarmed Black man. Now, in some of these cases, they were not unarmed, but we see about the gentleman running away, and we see about we see the story about the gentleman in a wheelchair being shot multiple times, unarmed. We see it so often, and now district attorneys in Democratic precincts around the country have been re-examining these cases, including 340 killings in Los Angeles County alone. Patrick, your thoughts on this?
I mean, I echo what the retired major says. It's much needed. And from my perspective here in Dallas, we have several very famous police murdering cases that we talk about even to this day. The most famous being a young man named Santos, who was killed by police officers in the 70s, I believe, which we still talk about today. We have, of course, Botham Jean, who the police officer wasn't on duty, but still entered his home, made assumptions, got murdered, and now we have dedications to him. We have others. Clinton Allen was a popular, I shouldn't say popular, excuse me, known killing that sparked the Mothers Against Police Brutality group here in Dallas. So we are very familiar with police brutality and excessive force here in Dallas, and especially in Texas. The history of the state is well known nationally. And I think that it is a much needed situation to have these cases re-examined. I mean, it just reminds me of how many unknown lynchings happened between the 100 years of Jim Crow that will go unexamined, that we had to use our resources at the Black press to sort of shed light on. And I think that that is also something to be cautious about because, you know, police unions and law enforcement is a very tight-knit group, you know, and they like the way that things work, and they are backed by the state. They're backed by taxpayers. And as we've seen in the past few years, they're backed by a lot of the public, especially in North Texas. If you've noticed, in North Texas is a lot of the people being arrested and prosecuted for the January 6th insurrection came from North Texas. A lot of them came from Planos and Frisco's and North Dallas. So the sentiment here is, I think, a little tense. We are a big, small town, so there's not a lot of, I think, public talking about the attitudes about it, but understanding what's happening is on both sides, whether you are for it or against it, very much a focal point of what people are concerned about here, Black, white, and others.
Yeah, and Dr. Chavis, Major Neal, Patrick Washington of the Dallas Weekly, he mentioned the unions, and in this case, the unions have come out strongly against this, and they are incensed.
Well, I think some unions have come out stronger, but I know
the police unions is what I'm talking about. The police unions,
right?
Yeah.
But there's some African American unions, police unions. An organization like the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, the Guardians, and other, Neil can talk about it, who do support these investigations. So again, I think that it's very important to have people of color in command of these police departments, in positions where they can join with these prosecutors to get these cases reopened. Neil, from a national perspective, what Patrick has reported from Dallas, and we could get a publisher from every city and we could get the same story. This is a national problem in the United States of America. So Neil, from your perspective, you have sort of a broad national perspective on this. What do you think are some of the remedies? How can African Americans and other people of color foresee a change in this situation? Neil, you're back on mute.
There you are.
Okay, so, all right.
Good.
So one of the for the African American community, and for those that support this type of reform, you have to support these prosecutors at the ballot box. You got to come out and you got to vote for them to keep them in office so that we can keep this initiative moving, which is very much needed. Another very important piece of reform, which I mentioned earlier, is about supporting in your communities and in your states the change for the standard regarding the use of force by police officers. Currently, that standard focuses just on that moment in time right before the force is used. And that's what we look at to evaluate the use of force by a police officer. So was that police officer in fear at that moment? Was that fear reasonable before they used?
You went back on mute, Major Neil. There you go. And you're muted again. You're having some problems there, Major Neil.
All right. I'm going to try something. It might be these earbuds, so I'm prepared to switch out here real quick.
Okay, so while he does that, Patrick, we hear all about the blue wall. Yeah, we can hear you. Mm-hmm. Patrick, we hear all about the blue wall.
Can you hear me okay?
And the yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you now. Mm-hmm.
And we talked about the certain police unions always seeming to not seeming, but always backing even when it's wrong. That needs to change too, right?
Well, of course. I mean, shooting someone in the back, as we all kind of know.
Okay, can you hear me now?
A defensive move.
Yes, Neil.
That's, I think, is what we need to sort of establish in a court of law, that you cannot claim self-defense while shooting somebody running away from you with no weapon at that. And so I think that we have a lot of systemic traditions of basically being the bad Negro, especially in the court of law, that are part of what we're talking about. It is not just a modern problem of, bad training or, exacerbated crime rates. This is something that has been ingrained in police and law enforcement since its inception, which is, shoot to kill, be scared because it is beneficial to the situation, and self-defense because you are backed by the state. These are things that have just been standardized. And just like the Major said, we need to focus on these standards, because we always hear that too. I was acting according to the book. Well, if the book says you should kill somebody, maybe we should reassess what the book says. Maybe we should reassess what the standards are. So the idea of shooting people in the back, especially running away in a situation in which law enforcement is what we've been told is to protect and serve, doesn't make any logical sense. It's offensive when you say it in sort of a situation where you're trying to explain why somebody is dead. And the idea of a justifiable killing should really have some major details to understand why it is justifiable, because you are now moving into a new state of what I think is legal precedent, which is, well, how, like the Major said, well, what is the situation in which you made the assessment, and why are you thinking that's the correct way to go? Those are the standards. That's what people are being trained to think. So we have a lot of nitpicky details to talk about, but this is a good first step.
Yeah, let's see if we can go back to the Major now. Sorry to your thoughts got interrupted there.
No, I got my backup earbuds in now. These are more reliable than the other ones. So he's absolutely right. Regarding this standard, and this is what we need to change. And let's look at the case again in Maine, where the police officer, number one, he's chasing someone, number one, who's a passenger, who just has a parole violation, and he knows who that person is. But yet he continues to pursue this person by himself in the dark through the woods, creating a very dangerous situation for himself. Now, we train our police officers not to do this sort of thing, not to put yourself into harm's way. Let's look at the Henry case where, we have a police officer who allegedly is hit by a car, driven by Mr. Henry. So he not only does he place himself in front of a car, but he fails to remove himself from in front of that car as the car is moving. This is what we train our police officers to do, to get out of harm's way, to seek cover, to not get in front of a moving vehicle. But we're not considering this. We're not considering these actions when we evaluate their use of force. We're only looking at that split second, that moment in time, right before they use the force. This is what we have to incorporate into future standards for the use of force. What did you do or not do leading up to the event where the force was used? Did you attempt to de-escalate? Why did you chase that person into the woods when you're not trained to do that? When you're trained not to do that, you have that person's identity. Let them go. They're not a danger to the community. Get a warrant and go pick them up later. Go back to your traffic stop and finish with those people, regarding the initial stop. So hopefully we'll get to this point, and these prosecutors that we're electing, hopefully they will play a major role in changing these use of force standards across the country.
Well, one prosecutor, Jose Garza out of Chavis County, Texas, this is what he had to say. He said, for 200 years in this country, we have been electing one kind of prosecutor. But since the killing of George Floyd, people across the country have spoken up loudly and clearly to say they want a new way of being policed. Dr. Chavis, I know we've discussed this a lot.
Well, absolutely. In my own case of Wilmington 10, it was about prosecutorial misconduct. Yes, it was some police abuse, but it was really prosecutorial misconduct. And I think that what Major Neil Franklin said is so important. Voting. We have to vote these district attorneys. We have to vote these judges. We have to vote these police commissioners, these mayors who appoint the police commissioners. Voting is going to have to be a corrective, and particularly now that the demographics are changing. Even in Texas, Texas is not going to forever be a red state. And Patrick, I think hopefully that 2022, there'll be a tremendous turnout of voting in Texas and Neil across the country. I think that African Americans, Latinos, and other communities of color are going to be voting in record numbers to try to get these prosecutorial misconducts changed and out of office.
Yeah, and Celeste Hart, and perhaps we can get your thoughts on this, Major and Patrick. Celeste Hart says qualified immunity should be addressed and abolished, and we hear about that a lot, don't we?
Absolutely. Qualified immunity is important for us to dramatically change that, and in many cases eliminate it, especially when we're talking about the violation of constitutional rights, especially when we're talking about a police officer actually breaking the law. And the use of force can rise to that level of breaking the law when it's outside of policy and training. So he's absolutely right. We need to vote and work on eliminating that.
Major, along those lines, what does eliminating what is qualified immunity? For people who don't know, what is qualified immunity?
So qualified immunity is this protection that's afforded to folks like police officers while in the performance of their duties. It pretty much resolves them from any financial liability when, I'll use the term, when misdeeds are done. Currently, that's what's protecting them. So pretty much they're protected financially. So that's why you see when people sue for police misconduct, it's usually the taxpayers that foot the bill because it's the police department that's really being sued. It's the city or the town or the county that's being sued. Financially, the police officers themselves are not impacted, and that needs to change. So if they're impacted, at least at some level financially, they'll think twice about how they act in some of the misdeeds that they do in our communities.
And that going along with what I guess Patrick talked about a little bit earlier, if you take away the qualified immunity and you get their partners to speak up, to eliminate this blue wall, Patrick, now you have something going, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a lot of steps, but the qualified immunity, I agree with with Celeste. It needs to be abolished. Like it is a protection that I think is once again put in place to protect the state and its agents to do what they want to do. I think that the big blue wall of silence, or whatever they call it, that non-speaking cop tradition, I think that's going to take a little bit more than just getting rid of qualified immunity. That is like, that's one of those things that's ingrained in an institution. Like the institution comes first, even if the institution's doing bad. We've seen that in many institutions where the greater good can be the evil in it. So I think that there has to be a lot more psychological kind of picking apart of that. Disqualified immunity, putting police in getting accountability for police would help that. Financial chipping away, like we've seen that work with prosecutions with the Klan and other white supremacist organizations. Attacking the money does work. And if you especially put the narrative out that the police person or the department isn't necessarily paying for their mistake, you are. I think if the public understands that their money is coming out to pay for these mistakes, that their voting dollars control it, it really comes back into the citizens to power. Like, we have the power to do this. And it's a lot of times, just like in recycling, it's the industry puts the onus back on the public, when really it's the entity doing the wrong. The police department does that a lot too. It's, hey, well, y'all, you need to get together, you need to vote, you need to do it. It's like, you need to stop killing people. And that needs to be the onus. Like, it needs to change internally. And I do applaud those who are trying and succeeding in certain cases in making those changes. But the individual that's making the choice not to speak out, that person shouldn't even be considered for the job. And there should be some kind of screening in the beginning, some psychological testing. I mean, a lawyer has to go to school for 4 years. And they're controlling people's lives. A doctor has to go to school for 8. An engineer has to go to school. There has to be training here that is paid for, a certified license. We all agree. But what is, the police academies? Is it 4-year plan? Do they learn psychology, language, civil law, civil rights? No.
Yeah.
And so even the people being selected for police people need to be considered in this big shift and change. And I mean, that's a lot, but I want to, just echo what the major's saying. Like, yeah, it's going to have, the financial part is another big step that is a small piece of what the big pie is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and your fellow publisher out in Texas, at the Texas Metro News, Cheryl Smith, says take away their pensions to pay the settlements. Another great idea. And that, Dr. Chavis, as we come to a close, this conversation, we have to continue this. We have to have you two both back to continue this conversation. But Dr. Chavis, I'm going to give you your close there as we, again, listen to Cheryl Smith's words. Go ahead, Dr. Chavis.
Well, I just want to echo what Major Neil Franklin and what Patrick Washington have said, and we definitely got to have both of them back. This is continuing discussion, and we should schedule them definitely to come back. This is a national problem, and I just want to thank both of you for your leadership and for your contribution to enabling the Black press of America to get these truths out to our people.
Yeah, thanks so much, Patrick Washington, the publisher of the Dallas Weekly, a retired Major Neil Franklin, the finest that law enforcement has had to offer. We appreciate you, that's for sure. The NMPA's Midwinter Training Conference kicks off in January on the 19th. We'll be at the Diplomat Beach Resort in Hollywood, Florida. All are welcome. The theme is the publishing industry, advancing the Black press of America, reaffirming, engaging, and empowering. Visit www.nmpa-events.com to register and reserve your hotel rooms. And in order to get the NMPA's discounted rate, hotel rooms must be reserved by December 12th. And our Black newspaper fact of today is the Philadelphia Tribune. Founded in 1884, it's the oldest continuously published African-American newspaper in the U.S. At one time, it competed against 4 other African-American papers in Philadelphia. Called the city's chief news sheet by W.E.B. Du Bois, it sought to improve the standard of living for its readers, reporting on unfair business practices by white businesses and raising funds to end school segregation in the city. Again, the history of the Black press shows you how important and vital the Black press was then and remains today. Everybody stay safe. There's a new variant. So please, if you can, get vaccinated. Definitely wear a mask and social distance where needed. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.